Hello, and welcome to School Leader Soundbites. This is the podcast for everyone in the K-12 space who wants to talk about branding, marketing, advertising, alignment to messaging, all of those really important things that make sure that our message is getting across to all of our target audience. And I'm your host, Veronica V. Sofer. Thrilled to be here with you because I like to really drop some nuggets and share some observations that I have gotten over the last few months of traveling all around and working with school districts. Be sure to hit subscribe. We don't want you to miss any episodes of School Leader Soundbites. And if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, make sure you drop some comments so I can be sure to connect with you. Today, I want to talk about having a thought partner and what that means and what it's like. Like many of you, when I got into the K-12 space, I was much younger. I had a lot less experience, but I was eager to learn. And one of the most important things that I was taught from my leadership team, not only from my superintendent, but from the other cabinet members, was how important it was to have someone to bounce ideas off of, just to get insight, really tap into those mentors who have been doing the work for so long. So while I may have been very skilled in communications and experienced in crisis communication and crisis management, I didn't necessarily have all of those insights that a veteran communications person or cabinet member had, just knowing the background from the school district. You know, when we go from school district to school district, there are different communities that we're serving. And as a superintendent or a leader, one of the most important things you do when you first get in is you listen. You try to understand where the community's values are and where the boundaries are for the different types of expectations. And so one of the things that one of my mentors told me early on was it was important to not make decisions in a silo. Yes, ultimately, I was the leader responsible for that particular function of the district, but it was important to make sure that I was getting insight, collaborating, getting feedback, bouncing ideas off of people, and really trying to assess how it might land for a particular audience. For example, if something is happening in your school district that you know the staff is going to be really excited about, you might want to think about how it's going to come across to non-certified staff or to even parents or to other elected officials. And likewise, if we're making decisions that are very operational with regard to curriculum or how we do busing or transportation, sometimes we're not taking into account what our families are valuing. So it's really important to make sure that we check in with people. And that's why having a thought partner is so very important. Now, many of you are in school systems that don't have large leadership teams. I work with school districts where there's only one or two principals in the entire district, and they make up the cabinet along with maybe one or two other people in the superintendent and central office. And so making sure that those folks have access to other people outside of the system are really important. Many of us naturally will call colleagues from previous districts to get a sense of what's happening, or maybe call some of our neighboring school districts, especially if we're in the same region or in the same county, to get a sense of what that community is thinking about a particular topic. So just make sure that you're tapping into people before you make decisions and getting their insights. One of the other important things to do is take a look at what has happened in the past, especially if you're new to a system. Make sure you do your due diligence. Ask those veteran principals and some of those parents who have been there through all the different changes. And one of my school districts, which was a fast-paced school district, fast-growing school district, there were some neighborhoods who were actually transferred 3 or 4 times in the 6 or 7 years previous to my joining. So when we started having conversations about moving boundaries and opening new schools and moving neighborhoods around, one of my board members reminded me that there was a particular subdivision who had experienced this over and over. And while the numbers might be small, their feelings and their emotions around being moved so many times, in some instances, they were moved 2 or 3 times throughout their students' time in elementary school. That is important information to have. And if it's not captured or not memorialized, you as someone new coming into the district may not know that. And so you might fall into some traps. So one of the most important things to do is ask as many questions as you can. Now, that does mean surveys are important and we want to track all the different data, but sometimes you don't have the kind of money that is required to ask those kinds of questions. So that's why having a thought partner who can maybe connect you to a district similar in size, with a similar demographic, with similar changes are going to be really, really important. So don't be afraid to ask. Tap into your natural network of folks. Many of you are members of NSPRA and how important that is to connect with folks outside of your region. but you also might want to connect with your local folks in different parts of the state, especially. Many of our states have really strong organizations, whether it's your school PR association or maybe working with your economic development office, working with your chamber of commerce, even working with your Kiwanis Club and those kinds of service organizations. They're going to have really important insight into how a community felt when something was done or changes were made, especially in those fast growth communities. And the other thing to remember is that you're bringing in new families into your community. And so they might be bringing insights from where they came from. A lot of times I would have parents moving into our school district and say things like, well, in my last state, we did this or we did that, or the laws were a little bit different. And so making sure that you've got hubs on your website to explain to parents why things are the way they are. It's important to cite law if that's important to a particular change that's happening, especially with our legislation changing so quickly. Educating your parents and sharing the why is half the battle, especially when you're going to make changes that might be controversial. So make sure you're tapping into the resources that you have. And you want to make sure that the team in particular, the team that's doing the communications, has the support of the leadership, which means they have access to people. So, for example, if people are concerned about a particular initiative that's being announced and the communication team is managing those communications, it's important that they have a direct line of communication to the administrator who can answer some very specific questions. Those are the questions that are really in the weeds. So it may not necessarily have to be the superintendent, but it may be the deputy superintendent. The communications team, as they're growing and as they're developing, need to have access. It's really important that they know who to go to for what questions. And all of this needs to be memorialized as often as possible in your standard operating procedures. Now, if you don't have standard operating procedures, now is the time to start developing them. Moving into the summer months is the best time to really spread all those papers out on the conference table, use those sticky notes, use those hot dots, and make sure you're figuring out what's rising to the top and prioritize them so that you can outline the steps that are involved in making these decisions, the tasks that need to be done, who's going to be responsible for them, where that historical information exists. Maybe it's a link to a Google Drive, or maybe it's a link to somewhere on your server where some of the previous administration's resources are available. Whatever it looks like for you in your district, summertime is the time to do it. I like to talk about doing retreats during the summer because you can actually make these retreats about team building by also doing some visioning work, talking about your true north and some of the ways that you want to operate. And this is a great reminder that a good professional development time is time spent away from the office. So if you can maybe go to one of your offsite campuses, or maybe there's a conference room in another building, or maybe you partner with your local chamber of commerce or a neighboring church. If you can devote some time for your team to go and retreat, look at your standard operating procedures and make sure everyone's emergency contact information is updated. Make sure you've looked at the calendar and you've mapped out all of the plans and events for the year. Identifying where there might be overlap with the school board meeting or maybe a really important religious holiday that's important to your community. Now is the time during the summer to think about those things. And again, that's why having a thought partner is so very important. You know, I talked about surveys just a second ago, and now is a great time in our conversation to thank our official podcast sponsors, K-12 Insight. They do a phenomenal job with some survey materials, tools, including chatbots on your website, and Let's Talk, which is a product that I have used in a number of my school districts. It's a really great way to track conversations, really see what's rising to the top and identifying where there is gaps in the communication so you can immediately address them in real time. So if you're looking for a tool that can help you forecast what's coming and what's rumbling in your community, check out Let's Talk. Make sure you reach out to them at k12insight.com/SOPHER and let them know that Veronica sent you, and one of their salespeople will be sure to reach out and connect because they've got some great resources. All right, getting back to why having that information is important, because it's going to drive your work. So as you are thinking about summer retreats and you're thinking about who your thought partners are, who your mentors are, who are the top 5 people that you call when there's something going on, make sure you're staying in touch with them. And you're not just calling them when you need them. Send them a little note, a note of encouragement. Share some really great news. For example, if your communications team or your cabinet or district just won a great award that they maybe gave you insight into, send them a thank you note. Let them know that you won this great award and you got recognized at the state level, at the national level, and they were a part of that. It's going to make them feel really good and make them want to help you more often. Another great way to connect with those people is by sharing resources that you find on your downtime, because we're always, as lifelong learners, we're always looking for content that's going to help make our team stronger and inspire them. Book studies are another great example of that. So when you come across some great resources, make sure you're sharing that with that person as well, because your mentors also want to grow. So if you are looking for some training, if you are looking for some professional development, for some team building, make sure to reach out and give me a call. I'm happy to help. If I'm not the right person to facilitate your team building, or if you're not in a position to put something together, then make sure you check out some of the great resources at your school public relations association, as well as NSPRA. They've got some great resources on their website, which is why membership is so important. And yes, I'm giving them a plug, because our school communication organizations are really the heartbeat of networking, connecting, collaborating, and finding those thought partners, because we all need them to grow. So thinking about where you're at for this summer, be sure you are spending some time relaxing, reflecting, planning, and building your team. Really investing in those soft skills, because that's what's going to carry you through for the next school year. So with that, I'm going to wrap up this episode of School Leader Soundbites. And as always, if you need any assistance, you can reach me at veronicavsofer.com. I'm just a call away, and I look forward to connecting. If you miss an episode, make sure you go back to your favorite podcast platform and hit subscribe. We don't want you to miss any episodes of School Leader Soundbites. And if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, drop some comments. I'll be happy to connect. Until then, stay connecting.